So good afternoon everyone. Is it audible? No. Now where did we stop the last time? So we had basically talked about the formation of the Congress, right? We talked about the formation of the Congress. Is it not working? It's the fan. Here so everything is open. So the last time we were talking about the Congress, we talked about the formation of the Congress. जो नहीं चल रहा है सब चला लीजिए पहले. Is it working? No? हाँ तो चला. वो चल रहा है. Okay. So the last time we were talking about the formation of the Congress, we talked about the moderates and the extremists. We talked about that how during the early periods of the Congress, there was a debate about the ideology which should guide. Now, let me just clarify here. What does the word ideology mean? मानसिकता. हाँ, ठीक है. ये तो सोच हो गई, मेंटालिटी हो गई, वो आइडियोलॉजी नहीं हुई. Study of ideas. Okay. Anything else? Purpose. Okay. See, why I am emphasizing this word ideology is because we'll be using this again and again. And if you look at the original Bipin Chandra, the thick Bipin Chandra, there's a separate chapter, Ideology of the Indian Freedom Struggle. The word ideology basically is the word ideology, no? The word ideology basically signifies, okay? So the word ideology basically signifies two things. Two things. One is the objectives. And second is the strategy. And the objectives also have to be well defined. Suppose we say that the objective is to attain the freedom or objective is to attain freedom, then what does freedom mean? That has to be well defined. And how is it going to be achieved also has to be well defined. What is the strategy that will be followed to achieve the objective? Both of them are often included within any study of ideology. Okay, just to say concretely, if I say today Vikas, you want Vikas, everybody wants Vikas, but what do you mean by Vikas? And how are you going to achieve it? Or everybody says Swachh Bharat. Arey, what is there? You clean your house also, that is Swachh Bharat. Or what exactly entails Swachh Bharat has to be well defined. And what is the strategy to achieve it? Okay. So, if that is something that ideologies often focus upon. And in the context of what we had discussed before, of the moderates view, or the views of the moderates and extremists, isn't it exactly two different ideologies? Or partly similar ideologies and partly different ideologies? Or there is a certain amount of similarity and certain amount of differences between the two. To the extent that while that both had partly different objectives and also shared partly different strategies, though they had similarity amongst them as well, right? So in that context, what you're basically trying to say here, that these are two different ideologies within the Congress, and we will see keep seeing that these ideologies, there are other ideologies also which keep entering the freedom struggle also and within the Congress also. So why am I saying this? Because जैसे अभी आपका question आया था 2 years ago, there's a question that many ideologies have influenced the Indian freedom struggle since its 2 or 3 years ago, since its inception. Discuss the influence of new ideologies introduced since the Gandhian phase of the Indian freedom struggle. So बार-बार ideology जो शब्द है, this is what ideology means first, and we'll keep coming to it again and again. Now, this is the background. Now let's go ahead and discuss today, firstly from the period of 1905. From the period of 1905 to the period of 1911, the partition of Bengal. The partition of Bengal. Now, discussing the partition of Bengal and the events around it is important, and why we are discussing this is primarily because this became one of the immediate issues around which nationalist activity emerged in a major way during the 20th century. Okay. Now the Congress had been formed 1885 onwards. We talked about this. We talked briefly about Tilak also, right? Moderate, extremists, all of this. Now, basically what we're going to do first is we'll write a timeline from 1903 to 1911. Okay. And from 1903 to 1911. Now, when we talk from the period of 1903 to 1911, the first thing to know is Curzon. Curzon in 1903, देखिए ऐसे ही होगा in the sense कि मैं जब आपसे discuss करूँगा, one way is that you discuss all governor generals in one line. No. When something of major significance is done by an individual, that is where we discuss it. So Curzon in 1903 is the Governor General or the Viceroy, and he is arguing that we need to divide Bengal. In 1903, Curzon, and you can write with me, there's not much, it is not very difficult to understand. Curzon in 1903 talked about the need to divide Bengal into two, given the or divide Bengal into two for the purpose of administrative for the purpose of just a second. For the purpose of administrative convenience. For the purpose of administrative convenience. The need to divide Bengal into two for the purpose of administrative convenience. देखिए बंगाल तब कैसा था जैसे उत्तर प्रदेश है ना. Bengal had Bengal, West Bengal, Bangladesh, parts of Odisha, parts of Bihar, and extending in the border just up to Assam. Okay, so it was administratively too large an entity, and the British said that for the purpose of administrative convenience, we will divide this Bengal into two entities. Okay, and that is what they said. At this point of time, the Congress was opposed to the partition of Bengal. Now let's just first understand why is the Congress opposed to the partition of Bengal. The Congress basically opposed the partition of Bengal primarily because it was the British had proposed to divide Bengal into a roughly east-west fashion. Okay, I'm not a geography guy, so my diagrams will be ऐसे. But basically, they proposed to divide Bengal into a east-west fashion where Bengal will be divided into two. Now, the first question that you can think of is, if Bengal has to be divided for administrative convenience into two, you can divide it like this also. You could divide it like this also. You could divide it like this also. 100 ways of dividing two things into two equal parts. कैसे भी काट सकते हैं. But why exactly east-west kind of orientation was devised? The Congress argued that this kind of orientation is devised primarily because of two reasons. One is to reduce the Bengali speaking population into a minority, where into a minority within western portion, because they said that in the newly created western portion of Bengal, Bengali speaking population would be roughly reduced to less than 50% of the population, and the Odia, the Bihari and partly the Assami speaking population will constitute more than 50% put together. Okay, and the Bengali speaking population would be reduced to less than 50% of the total. Now, why is this significant? I'll explain in a minute. And the Congress, if you remember, I had told you before also, initially is dominated by whom? The people from Bengal as well as the Bombay province. It is the educated, upper middle class educated elites of Bengal and Bombay who were some of the early founders of pre-Congress associations also, and were also dominant within the Congress. And Bengal was one of the few areas wherein urban areas Congress had a certain amount of reach, and especially amongst the Bengali speaking population. So dividing Bengal into two was significant because of this reason. That will become more clear, which I'll explain the other reason, then it will become clear. So one thing is that if you divide Bengal into two, in the eastern Bengal, in East Bengal, most of the big landowners were to be the Muslim landed elites. Most of the big landowners were to be the Muslim landed elites. Okay. In East Bengal, most of the landowners would be the Muslim landed elites. Why is this point significant? This point is significant primarily because these Muslim landed elites were the big landlords in this region. Okay, historically, from the time of the Nawabs of Bengal, etc., most of the big landowners in East Bengal were the Muslim landed elites. Now, if you remember, tell me something. After 1850s, were the landed elites supportive of the British or opposed the British? After 1850s and after 1857, the landed elites and the princely states were largely supportive of the British, right? So what do you think? The Muslim landed elites in East Bengal, will they be supportive or not? Yes or no? They were supportive of the partition because of two reasons. One is that it would allow, is firstly, given that they had a closer proximity to the British, this is something, was a decision they were supportive of. Secondly, also, if you remember the Council Act of 1892, it is introducing what? Elected Indians. And who are those individuals who are going to have a major say? Those who own land and education. So the Muslim landed elites of East Bengal will have majority of the voting rights in the region also. And by virtue of majority of voting rights in the region and being the dominant local elites, they will be able to dominate what? The politics of East Bengal. So with the aim of dominating the politics of East Bengal, as well as with the other idea that given that their interests sided more with the British, landed elites' interests in general sided more with the British. So the Muslim landed elites of the East Bengal were supportive of the partition, but the Congress was not. Because for Congress, which was spreading its wings in Bengal, this was a challenge. Because by dividing Bengal into two, Eastern Bengal would become the domination, could become an area where the Muslim elites, landed elites could be dominant, decreasing the hold of Bengal, decreasing the hold of Congress in Eastern Bengal. Whereas in the West, given that the Bengali speaking population will be reduced to a minority, it would basically do what? It would basically mean that the reach of Bengal, the reach of Congress even in Western Bengal would be limited. Okay. So the Congress argued that the decision to divide Bengal was primarily taken to weaken the hold of Congress and Indian nationalism in Bengal by dividing the Indian masses in Bengal along religious and linguistic lines. Religious lines में कैसे division है? Where East Bengal, most of the landed elites are going to be Muslims, whereas that was not the case in the West. Whereas linguistically, how is it a division? Is that Bengali speaking population is reduced to a minority in Western Bengal. Do you get this point? This is essential to understand as to what is actually the Congress opposition. The Congress is saying that a unified Bengal could become the nerve center of Indian nationalism. Dividing Bengal in such a manner is going to weaken the hold of Congress and Indian nationalism in one of the first early areas where nationalism was seeking to emerge. On top of that, Curzon had made another statement in 1903 that it was his personal wish. Curzon was being criticized by the Congress. In 1903, Curzon had given this proposal that the British government is looking to, carry out a partition for the purpose of administrative convenience. When this idea came out, Congress members criticized Curzon's policies, and Congress members were critical of Curzon's policies, which led Curzon to issue a statement that he would personally ensure the demise of the Congress. So, anyways, Curzon also got miffed a bit, and Curzon issued a statement that he'll personally ensure the demise of the Congress. And if you remember, I told you, the Universities Act of 1904, Rayleigh Commission, all of that had been introduced also during the time of Curzon. So, Curzon already enjoyed a certain degree of unpopularity. The decision to partition Bengal is just making things worse, and Curzon also issued a statement. Now, it is in this context that in 1903, when this idea was proposed for the first time by Curzon, the Congress argued against it. Congress argued against it and made its opposition clear to this idea by the beginning of 1904. So by 1904, Congress basically, you can write, okay, is by 1904 that Congress voiced its opposition to partition of Congress voiced its opposition to the partition of what? Congress voiced its opposition to the partition of Bengal and argued that it represented a deliberate attempt to weaken. It represented a deliberate attempt to weaken Bengali nationalism, by dividing it along linguistic and religious lines. I'm sorry for my handwriting, but it's okay. Okay. That is what is the Congress opposition, and Congress, how is the Congress going to voice its opposition? The opposition of the Congress was voiced through writing letters and articles in the newspaper, the old moderate strategy, right? The Congress is making its opposition to this idea clearly visible in 1904 by writing a number of letters. However, in 1905, you see that despite Congress opposition and despite the known opposition of Congress to the partition of Bengal, Curzon went ahead and, you see, the partition of Bengal is notified in 1905. Despite opposition, the partition is notified in 1905. Now, when the partition is notified in 1905, not just Curzon is criticized, it is the moderates also who are criticized. Moderates are criticized in 1905. Why? Because their opposition, their letter writing pratyogita had yielded little. Okay? Or merely writing to the letters to the British had not brought about any reversal in what? In reversal in British attitude or policy, and the British had gone ahead and announced the partition of Bengal. So the extremists criticized the moderate strategy as useless and ineffective in preventing the partition of Bengal, and argued that there is a need to move forward with a much wider definition of what is the extremists argued that there is a need to move forward with a much wider method of protest, and that involved the use of masses, and that is why they argued the whole extremist ideas that we've discussed before. That is what they said, that involving the masses is critical, and the use of instruments of boycott and Swadeshi must be put to use. That is what they said, and the instruments of boycott and Swadeshi were put to use after this time. In 1905, extremists argued, and thus for the first time in the Indian freedom struggle, 2 decades after the formation of Congress, the Congress is for the first time giving public speeches in a major way, and arguing that the people must oppose the decision of partition of Bengal. How? By the use of Swadeshi and boycott. We talked about the idea of Swadeshi in detail? No? Okay. So we'll talk about it. So, देखिए इस बार भी आपके मेंस एग्जाम में क्वेश्चन है, गांधी सवाल जब भी कम आएगा तो गांधी के बिना तो यूपीएससी का हो नहीं पाएगा, है ना. सो दैट इज समथिंग विच इज देयर. सो the instrument of Swadeshi and boycott were put to use for the first time during the movement against partition of Bengal. Though often in popular parlance we try to or we equate Gandhi with the adoption of Swadeshi and boycott, it is not the case. Swadeshi and boycott in a way were pre-Gandhian techniques. What is Gandhi's contribution, we'll come to later on this issue, is to put it to more wider use and to give Swadeshi a more holistic definition also. But Swadeshi here was based on the idea of Atma Shakti or self-reliance or self-sufficiency, and decrease the reliance on imports, right? Burning of foreign cloth, decreasing the reliance on foreign goods, promoting indigenous goods. That is what is Swadeshi. Swadeshi and self-sufficiency is also expanded to the idea of setting up Indian-run schools, okay? Decreasing the reliance on British schools. And Indian-run schools will develop what? Political consciousness amongst Indians, they argued, will make them aware about the nationalist cause from an early age, and something which will politically educate the next generation of Indians. Today Indian education has no such objective. Today Indian education has only one objective, is कि 99% आना चाहिए, maths, physics, chemistry, biology, बस ज़्यादा कॉमर्स, बस अभी हो गया. तो political consciousness is not often the objective of the Indian middle class also when they go for education. But कोई नहीं, हम वापस. But this was the objective then of Indian education, and this is something that they say in 1905. The extremist Congress leaders were the ones who were to give this call. For the first time, Congress was giving speeches in which 25,000 people accumulated in Calcutta. This was Congress' first brush with talking to the masses or organizing the masses. Congress did door-to-door campaigns to involve the people and explain to them why the decision of partition of Bengal is a bad idea. Even prominent individuals like Rabindranath Tagore wrote the poem Amar Sonar Bangla, primarily emphasizing the idea of a glorious Bengal and the need to keep Bengal united. Okay, and this is something which later becomes a national anthem of Bangladesh, right? So all these things were happening in the area of literature, involvement of masses, giving public speeches, writing articles, and witnessed the participation of both Hindus and Muslims. However, the movement against partition of Bengal also had certain things and certain weaknesses. One weakness is that this is first attempt to move towards involvement of masses. So it's not something which is reaching out all of a sudden to all areas. Dekhiye, back then there is no Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp. Reaching out to the masses involves hard political work on the ground. Congress is an organization primarily centered in rural areas or urban areas? Urban areas. And the masses are in rural areas. So the reach of the Congress is not too big. And the movement against partition of Bengal, this involved masses, does not mean कि पूरा Bengal ही सड़कों पे उतर आया था. Okay, it is something which is a mass movement, but there can always be a greater involvement of the masses. This is just the beginning in 1905. So the movement against partition of Bengal is launched in 1905. Now, and it involved the use of Swadeshi. Now, let's just briefly talk about the idea of Swadeshi. So what is Swadeshi? So let me just precisely say what is Swadeshi goods. देखिए, what are Swadeshi goods? This is something that I'm explaining primarily with the intention that you can use these ideas elsewhere. Okay, and you will not find a very elaborate discussion on this in most of the history books that you read. And let's say, what is Gandhi's ideas on Swadeshi? This Swadeshi was something that was amply promoted by Gandhi. You said Khadi. Okay, what apart from Khadi? Indigo. अरे आज के टाइम में बताइए, ये टाटा नमक देश का नमक? Bata is a Canadian company. Okay, हाँ. So बाबाजी का products. You have Kajaria tiles, देश की मिट्टी, देश की कंपनी. अक्षय कुमार tells you, देश की मिट्टी से बनी टाइल, कजरिया टाइल. So this स्वदेशी टाइल, so स्वदेशी कार, टाटा नैनो. तो कोई और बना देगा. और कुछ स्वदेशी? हाँ, पीटर इंग्लैंड, somebody said, हाँ पीटर इंग्लैंड, आदित्य बिरला ग्रुप. अच्छा, स्वदेशी SBI, स्वदेशी बैंक, ऐसा कुछ पेटीएम के पहले है? और बताइए. हाँ, एयर इंडिया, स्वदेशी एयरलाइन, स्वदेशी एयरलाइन ऑल्सो भी है. और बताइए, और क्या है स्वदेशी? इसमें तो कुछ भी नहीं है स्वदेशी. नन ऑफ दिस इज स्वदेशी. HMT क्लॉक, स्वदेशी कार एम्बेसडर, प्रीमियर पद्मिनी, है ना, बंद हो गया सब. ये नए हैं ना स्वदेशी, इसमें तो कोई भी स्वदेशी नहीं है. व्हाट इज स्वदेशी? एनी आइडिया? मेड इन इंडिया इज स्वदेशी. हाँ, मेड इन इंडिया बाय इंडियंस. सो देन टाटा नैनो स्वदेशी, made in India by Indians? Anything more than made in India by Indians? Raw materials must be procured from within India. Made in India by Indians, raw material procured from within India. चलिए और कुछ जोड़ना चाहेंगे? Profit should also stay within India. Okay, made in India by Indians, profits procured, profits within India, raw material procured from India. Okay, और हाँ? Avoiding foreign goods. Swadeshi basically is an idea that I told you promotes the idea of self-sufficiency. Gandhi built on the idea of Swadeshi and said that any Swadeshi enterprise must promote self-sufficiency at 3 levels. At the levels of an individual, at the levels of let's say state. Any Swadeshi enterprise must promote self-sufficiency at all the three levels. For example, how do you make an individual self-sufficient? You make an individual self-sufficient by providing him what? Employment and a sustainable source of gainful employment. Self-sufficiency, देखिए, for example, I'm just giving you an example. Suppose you set up an enterprise. Gandhi would argue that when you set up an enterprise, if it generates a good amount of employment opportunities for people, which will allow them to sustain their livelihood on a long-term basis, you are promoting self-sufficiency of the individual workers. This is something which a Swadeshi enterprise must do and would do. Now, every economic entity, whether it is a Tata Nano or a Kajaria type, is generating employment. That is why Gandhi argued that Gandhi never said Tata Steel is Swadeshi steel. There is a reason for this. Okay. When Tisco was set up, etc., Gandhi is not saying yes, Swadeshi steel hai, ghar mein apna hai. Okay. Why? Because certain industries and economic activities are capital intensive and generate less employment. And some economic activities are one which are more employment intensive. Let me give you a practical example. Gems and jewelry is something which is employment intensive. Handloom is something which is employment intensive. Okay. As compared to say power loom. Power loom is textile mills which are run largely by huge machines with electricity with a minimal use of labor. So just merely generating employment is not enough. You should generate gainful employment and something which is basically employment intensive. Okay, I'm going to talk about 3 or 4 ideas of Gandhi here. Okay. So Gandhi is building these ideas actually more carefully. So he is saying employment generation, gainful employment generation in a sustainable manner for a significant number of people is important for an enterprise to be called a Swadeshi enterprise. Second, he is saying this self-sufficiency that is promoted must be promoted not merely at the level of the individual but the level of the larger community. And to that extent, for ensuring that you have sustainability at the level of community, he is also emphasizing the idea of environmental. What? Why? Because, why environmental sustainability? Because suppose you set up an industry which is generating employment, but if it is causing too much environmental pollution, then what is going to happen? It is going to compromise the needs of, it is going to compromise the ability of the future generation to do what? Meet its own needs. You set up a polluting industry which pollutes the local area. Okay, say you set up a textile industry which uses dyes, etc., and releases the effluent in the water which pollutes the groundwater, harming the local farmer, harming the local community and hampering the community's ability to meet its needs on a sustainable long-term basis. That is not a Swadeshi enterprise. Then he is saying ultimately it must also promote self-sufficiency, not just at the level of individual, at the level of community, but also at the level of the wider state or nation. And this is what you say, decrease the reliance on what? Reliance शब्द यूज करना अच्छी चीज नहीं है आजकल. Decrease the dependence on imports. That is what is Swadeshi to Gandhi. It is not, and that is why you see Khadi is Swadeshi. It uses, firstly, Khadi is made by what? Use of manual labor through handlooms, etc. It is employment intensive. Secondly, it uses raw material which cause no major environmental pollution. It uses natural dyes. It does not use synthetic dyes. Okay. That is why khadi clothes are normally available in dull colors, not in very bright colors. Okay, because limited number of dyes, natural dyes are available. So khadi is something which is not environmentally polluting, is generating employment. It is dependent upon raw materials procured from within the country and also is promoting self-sufficiency at the level of nation. That is why Modi ji and Gandhi both promoted khadi. Because after Gandhi ji anyways it was only Modi. So that is the, so you see that is something which is, what is Swadeshi. Now here also I am just briefly explaining to you another thing about Gandhi's viewpoint on technology. When Gandhi is talking about employment intensive thing, Gandhi is well aware that technology can lead to what? Displacement of labor. Technology can lead to displacement of labor is something that Gandhi was aware, and everybody's written this? नहीं? अच्छा, तो नहीं लिखा तो लिख लीजिए. I'm not going to dictate this. I'm just explaining this to you so that you get the broader context. Why I'm not dictating? क्योंकि फिर क्लास में बस यही होता रहेगा. अभी एक क्लास में हम स्वदेशी में ही खत्म हो जाएगी. The other thing that Gandhi is voicing his views are on technology. Suppose you are writing an essay on science and technology. वहाँ पे आप गांधी के views on technology use कर सकते हैं. Okay. So Gandhi is saying that with technology, and if you introduce automation today, for example, or say technology can have two kinds of effect. It can do two kinds. There are two kinds of technology, Gandhi is saying. And one need not hold Gandhi's views on everything first and the final word, but you should know Gandhi's view. Okay? So Gandhi's view on technology is that there are two kinds of technologies. One is labor displacing. A technology which displaces labor, and the other kind of technology is one which would reduce the drudgery of labor. देखिए, suppose you introduce technology to do what? To introduce robots, okay, to do a work that could have easily done earlier by what? Individuals, and the intention is primarily to displace labor. Suppose you have Mr. Elon Musk. If Gandhi was to meet Elon Musk, Gandhi would not have been very happy. Apart from other reasons, on the fact that if he wants driverless cars, Gandhi is going to ask, अरे भाई क्या हो गया? कम पड़ गए लोग दुनिया में, कमी हो रही है लोगों की जो गाड़ी चला सके आपके लिए, इंडिया आ जाओ, बहुत है हमारे पास. So Gandhi would have asked this question: what is the need to introduce such a technology? Is it something which is introduced with the intention of displacing labor, or reducing the drudgery of the laborer, or reducing the difficulty of the laborer? If it is for displacing labor, Gandhi is saying that such technology which displaces labor does what? Generates unemployment. Such technology which displaces labor generates unemployment. Now, basically, so this is Gandhi's viewpoint on technology which displaces labor. Now, I am not saying that that means that today, as the great grandsons and daughters of Gandhi, you should what? Say that all technology is bad, or technology which displaces labor is bad. But realize that automation or introduction of new technologies which may increase efficiency and decrease the reliance on labor may also produce another set of problem, and that is a rise in unemployment. And how do you deal with both the issues? It may produce efficiency, but it may also produce unemployment. And how do you deal with it? Gandhi is making you aware of the perils of too much introduction of technology, especially the one which displaces labor. But Gandhi is not blanketly against any and every technology. He is saying technology which reduces the drudgery of labor is most welcome. For example, if you see today, manual scavengers are dying increasingly in larger numbers while cleaning septic tanks, etc. Right? So if technology was to be introduced to make their work easier and prevent them getting exposed to toxic gases or influences and help them perform their work with ease, Gandhi would be supportive of it. So for example, Pradhan Mantri ji ne har ghar mein ek chulha diya, Ujjwala. So that is something that Gandhi would be supportive of, because it reduces indoor air pollution, reduces the drudgery of labor of the women who are supposed to primarily cook food and etc. So in that context, Gandhi is not opposed to technology, but he is arguing that to what end it is being put to use is going to be used to what? आपने ethics पढ़ लिया? End है ना? अभी आपका तो अभी मैं ये नहीं कह रहा हूँ कि गांधी यूटिलिटेरियन है, ठीक है? गांधी तो मतलब अगर कांत के कोई उत्तराधिकारी होते प्रेजेंट टाइम्स में तो शायद गांधी होते, ऐसा ज़रूरी नहीं है वो भी, लेकिन फिर भी so Gandhi is not just arguing about ends, but he is saying but that ends to the extent which technology you are introducing with what motive is what is going to determine which technology is acceptable and which is not, and which we must be cautious against. So to that extent there are Gandhi's views on technology. And so while introducing any technology, Gandhi is making us aware about what? The social costs of introducing technology and the social aspect or the social impact of introducing new technologies, they must also be factored in. Okay, अभी आपने बोला कि आधार लाएंगे, हाँ, but if आधार, I'm just saying from an ethics point of view, आपने ethics पढ़ लेना तो भी मेरा काम बहुत easy हो जाता है इधर उधर की बकवास करने के लिए, है ना? For example, you see आधार, if there is a physically challenged individual who cannot make use of the biometric system for whatever reasons, the Aadhaar, that is why has, initially it was based on biometric and the thing, but a number of people's fingerprints etc. cannot be read and their exclusion errors. Basically individuals who needed to verify, but because the fingerprints etc. are not readable, they cannot use what? The verification system of Aadhaar, and thus could not avail of government subsidies or services. So then Aadhaar, that is why today is moving towards facial recognition. कि अभी आप थोबड़ा दिखा के हो जाएगा. But what about old age people who need pensions and who may find it difficult to get an unemployment pension of 200-300 rupees, 500 rupees, and they have to come all the way to the pension center to get their pensions. Okay, so whatever it is there, what you need to understand is that if technology is being used, Aadhaar is a technology new. Gandhi would ask that introduction of such technology, is it easing the drudgery or not? If it is easing the drudgery, well and good. If it is not easing the drudgery, then it is perhaps not very justified. Okay. So that is the kind of questions. You know, what is the objective, and is that objective to ensure the well-being, that kind of a thing. So that is what you see about technology. So Gandhi's view on technology is not that he is opposed to all technologies. He is opposed to a certain set of technologies or the social cost of certain technologies. Is this clear? चलिए अभी वापस आ जाते जहाँ हम थे on Curzon and 1905. So in 1905, despite a year of moderate-led protests, Curzon went ahead with partition of Bengal, which was Curzon went ahead with what? With partition of Bengal. Curzon went ahead with partition of Bengal. Curzon went ahead with partition of Bengal, and you see as Curzon went ahead with partition of Bengal, uh, what is happening is that the extremists criticized the leadership of criticized the leadership of moderates as what? Weak and ineffective. So extremists are saying to moderates, आपसे नहीं हो पाएगा. Okay? So extremists are saying to moderates, आपसे नहीं हो पाएगा. Moderates are saying, तुमसे हो पाएगा तो कर लो. Okay? The extremists now led the movement against partition of Bengal by involving the masses. They had asked the question in the prelims examination that when was the instruments of boycott and Swadeshi used for the first time? One option was partition of Bengal and others were related to Champaran, Kheda, etc. And basically Gandhi, non-cooperation, these kind of other 2-3 options were there. What you need to know is the first time the Congress uses these instruments are during the movement against partition of Bengal by involving the masses through the use of boycott and Swadeshi. Okay. Through the use of boycott and Swadeshi. And this is something which is happening in 1905. Now this goes on for a year. This all movement is happening in Bengal, not anywhere else. This is all happening in Bengal. After much deliberation, the moderates agreed to extremist strategy, and this is how it is happening. Moderates are reluctant. Why? Because they fear a British crackdown. Through the use of force, they feared a British police crackdown or that Congress leaders could be imprisoned. But the extremists are insistent that we need to move forward by involving the masses. This is what is happening for the first time in 1905. Now a year of protests followed, and in 1906 you see that there is a certain amount of change. What is happening in 1906? Ki ek saal, 1 year of extremist strategy had been implemented where? In Bengal. And now moderates asked to the extremists by the next session of the Congress, what have you achieved in the past 1 year? The moderates now asked the extremists कि आपसे भी कुछ नहीं हो पाया. If we were unable to prevent partition of Bengal, you have been unable to ensure its reversal. So to that extent, the moderates also criticized the extremists कि आपसे भी तो कुछ नहीं हो पाया. Your strategy has also not achieved anything. Extremists said that our strategy has not failed. Rather, we need to apply it at a bigger level. Take it beyond Bengal, etc., etc. And if they are not still ready to go ahead with partition of or call of the partition of Bengal, we should ask for Swaraj. We should ask for independence. Okay. Moderates ने बोला देखो फालतू बात तो करोगे, ठीक है. So moderates are afraid that this will lead to what? Calls for Swaraj, etc. will lead to what? A British crackdown, and will put everybody in jail. And basically that is why they are skeptical of all such ideas. But to build a bridge between the moderates and extremists at this point of time and carry forward the struggle, Dadabhai Naoroji is made the president of the Congress in 1906, for the 1906 session. Actually, Naoroji himself was a moderate leader, but he was the one who was respected by both the moderates and the extremist camp, though he was primarily a moderate leader, and his task was to somehow bring about a rapprochement between the two. Okay, between whom? Between the moderates and the extremists. And this is something that he is doing in 1906. He is saying to the extremists, what do you want? You want to you want to give a call for Swaraj? Okay, we will give a call for Swaraj. That Congress will argue for Swaraj from here onwards. To the moderates, he said, don't worry, while we give a call for Swaraj, we will ensure that the British do not make such a demand which will make it easy for the British to crack down on the Congress. So he said, we will argue for Swaraj. Okay. Swaraj, firstly he said, Swaraj, what do you mean by Swaraj? देखिए वही बात, जैसे विकास, अरे what do you mean by विकास? Swaraj. So basically he's saying that Swaraj on the lines of wide British colonies. देखिए, there were two kinds of British colonies. One where the British individuals, white British individuals had settled, and the other kinds of colonies were where the British did not settle down. Colonies where the British did settle down were places like Australia, were places like New Zealand. Okay, these were places where the white British population had went ahead and settled down. But there were other places like African colonies, or there were things like West Indies, or things like India, etc., where the British had largely not settled down. The British treated these two areas differently. For example, South Africa was also one area where British had settled down in some numbers. Okay, so but Australia and New Zealand were the classic examples, and the British treated white British colonies as different from non-white British colonies, in the sense that white British colonies were given autonomy. They would have local elected governments with a control of finance, budget, law and order, except in two critical areas, on foreign policy and the army. Foreign policy and army would continue to stay under the British Crown. Their commander-in-chief, etc., would be appointed by the British Crown. They would continue to stay under the British Crown, even though for other elements there would be local autonomy. They could have their regular elections, elect their individuals, etc. So autonomy on the lines of white British colonies. Naroji clarified that we want that India must stay a part of British. India must stay a British colony, but it must be treated similar to other white British colonies. That is what we mean by Swaraj. Swaraj here was not a call for complete independence for the British. You give a call for complete independence from the British, this will lead to sedition, right? And sedition will lead you into jail. And Gandhi and Congress wants to avoid jail, right? So that is what they said, Swaraj on the lines of white British colonies. That's what he clarified, Naroji. Secondly, he said, how will you attain this Swaraj? Wahi baat, Vikas, but how will you attain Vikas? So Swaraj on the lines of white British colony is going to be attained through the use of constitutional means. अरे partition of Bengal तो reverse हो नहीं रहा है. You will attain Swaraj through constitutional means, which is gradual devolution of power through legislative councils. That is what they are saying. Swaraj by constitutional means, through the legal mechanism, through the constitutional means available. तभी हम बात करते हैं, आज आप बार बार ये बोलते हैं कि जो भी इशू है उसको constitutional means or within the limits of constitution can be resolved, isn't it? Yes or no? So that is something, that is what they meant by that Swaraj will be attained on the lines of white British colonies through the use of constitutional means. So this talk of constitutional means will keep whom happy? The moderates happy. And this talk of Swaraj, even though it is of a limited variety, will keep whom happy? Extremists happy. So दोनों की बात मान ली. He is trying to build a bridge between the two. But then the question was whether to extend the movement outside Bengal or not also. Extremists said, let's take it outside Bengal. Moderates said, no, it is the issue of Bengal. The protest must stay limited to Bengal. Naroji said that, okay, the movement will stay limited to Bengal. So you see that in 1906 they agree to this idea. The movement will stay limited to where? Bengal. 1906 ये बात हुई. ठीक है भाई, एक साल और कर लो. 1907, the movement is by 1907 a year had passed. Another year, एक साल के बाद एक और साल, right? So by 1907 another year had passed and the mass movement was restricted to Bengal. Nothing of significance was achieved. The British government had yet not called off the partition of Bengal. The British government had yet not called off the partition of Bengal. तो अभी क्या होगा? फिर डिबेट, कांग्रेस में बहुत बुद्धिजीवी है ना, तो बहुत बात कर रहे हैं, हर साल बात करते हैं, क्या करना है अब. सो एक्सट्रीमिस्ट आर सेइंग आपने हमारी बात मानी नहीं, that we should have taken the movement outside Bengal. Moderates are like, we have listened to you enough. 1905, 1906, we have listened to you enough. 2 years of your leadership has yielded nothing. They are saying you are not allowing us to lead. The moderate fellows are slowing us down. We want to take the movement outside Bengal. We want to build pressure on the British, but you are unnecessarily creating hurdles. ये moderate जो है, ये पुरानी जो पीढ़ी की सोच है, ये नई पीढ़ी के साथ नहीं चल पा रही है. Extremists must part ways from the moderates. Moderates are slowing down the pace of the Indian freedom struggle. Moderates are like the extremists are on a suicide mission. That they want to do whatever. We do not want to have anything to do with them. Why? Because they will land themselves in trouble and we don't want to be in trouble. So moderates are saying, extremists, if you want to part ways, you can go ahead. Extremists are like, anyways the moderates are slowing us down. And the mass appeal is anyways of whom? The extremists. So we are good on our own. So let's part ways. In 1907, you see that there is difference. But the immediate cause also becomes the leadership that extremists wanted to take the movement outside Bengal and they wanted the appointment of whom? Tilak. They wanted the appointment of Tilak as the leader of the Congress for the 1907 session. But the moderates were keen on denying extremists the leadership and Tilak the presidency of the Congress. And to that extent, the moderates basically deliberately organized the next session in Surat. Now, according to the Congress rules, the province in which the session was held, the president of the Congress could not be from that session. So in 1906, for example, the session was held in Calcutta and Naroji was from Bombay. Okay, so the session was held in Bengal province and Naroji was from the Bombay province. Now here the session is to be held in Surat, and Surat then was a part of the Bombay province and Tilak was from Pune. So basically it's that he is also from the Bombay province, so he is automatically not eligible to contest for the position of party president. The extremists saw this as a deliberate attempt to deny them the leadership of the Congress and also to Tilak. And to that extent, this is what eventually led to the split of the Congress. Now, ये क्यों important है? आपसे prelims में सीधा सीधा पूछेंगे. Discuss the factors which led to the split of the Congress. Okay. Discuss the factors which led to the split of the Congress. So these are the factors that led to the split of the Congress. Is dispute over whether to take the movement outside Bengal? Yes, that is the reason. There are three reasons broadly. Dispute to take over the movement outside Bengal. The extremists wanted it, the moderates did not. Dispute over whether to extend the movement outside Bengal, that is one thing. Dispute over the presidency of Tilak. While the extremists wanted it, the moderates were not keen. And thirdly, the extremists felt that the moderates are slowing the freedom of struggle, slowing the pace of the freedom struggle, and the moderates are thinking that basically the extremists are going to land themselves into a difficult situation against the British, which they don't want to be a part of. तो इन सारी चीजों को चलते हुए क्या हुआ? Split of the Congress in 1907, the Surat split of the Congress. There is another reason. Let me just clarify that. And that is, in the beginning of 1907, before the Surat session, the British government had issued a statement. What was this statement? The statement said that the British government is looking at the demand of Indians for a further devolution of power. So Indians are demanding further devolution of power, things like Swaraj, etc. And since a long time, moderates had been demanding further devolution of power. So British government said it is willing to consider Indian demands for further devolution of power. So the extremists want to take the movement outside Bengal, but the moderates do not want to rock the boat with whom? British. They don't want to rock the boat with British or disturb the equation with British at a time when the British are promising further reforms. So the moderates were hopeful of further constitutional reforms, whereas the extremists wanted to take the movement outside Bengal. So ye ho gaya. These are the reasons which led to the split of the Congress in 1907. Now, any question that you want to ask till here? Anything you want to ask? देखिए, अभी before we write further, we have written till 1906, right? Before we write further, 1906 also had another set of people, those who supported what? The partition of Bengal were the Muslim landed elites from where? From East Bengal, and this included Nawab Salimullah, of Dhaka, Aga Khan, and others. They basically supported the decision, the British government decision to partition Bengal, and they are the Muslim landed elites from eastern Bengal, and this delegation of Muslim landed elites from East Bengal basically went to Shimla to present their support to the British decision to partition Bengal. This is what is called as a Shimla. This is what is called as a Shimla deputation. Basically, the delegation of these individuals from which form the prominent Muslim and landed elites of Eastern Bengal are offering support to the British decision to partition Bengal at a time while the Congress is opposing it. If the Congress argued that it represented the voice of Indians, then the Muslim delegation or the Shimla delegation basically also argued that it was also a voice. It is, if one section of Indians were opposed to the partition of Bengal, there was another section of Indians which supported the partition of Bengal. And that is what is the Shimla delegation doing, or the Shimla deputation doing. It is these individuals, the Muslim landed elites of Eastern Bengal in 1906, are leading the formation or led the formation of what? Of the All India Muslim League. Led the formation of the All India Muslim League. Yes? He led the formation of what? The All India Muslim League. Now, they are offering their support. Then, I'll talk about the Muslim League a bit more in some time. But let's, and that I'll explain a bit more about the Muslim League in a while. In 1907, we saw that following the, in 1906, we had to write first, right? We had not written about the 1906 session also, right? In 1906, Dadabhai Naoroji was appointed as what? As the president. As the president to build bridges. To build bridges with whom? To build bridges with, or to build bridges between the moderates and extremists, and the Calcutta session saw what? Saw a call that was given for, the Calcutta session saw the call that was given for Swaraj. In the Calcutta session, the call was given for Swaraj on the lines of white British, colonies, and B, through the use of constitutional means, isn't it? Through the use of constitutional means. On the lines of white British colonies, through the use of constitutional means, while the movement would stay restricted to what? The movement would stay restricted to Bengal. This is what is there. सीधा सीधा prelims में question आता है about why is the 1906 session of the Congress important? Because you see evolution in Congress. 20 साल पहले तो आवाज नहीं निकल रही थी. अभी आज इतने बड़े हो गए कि स्वराज की बात करेंगे. फिर आप छोटे थे तो आपने क्या बोला? हाँ पापा ठीक है. अभी आप बड़े हो गए. 30. You're like, I am 30 now. I'm no more a kid. Right? अभी स्वराज, अभी घर आना है तो आना है, नहीं आना है तो नहीं आना है. Sitting in a movie yesterday at 11 o'clock. कौन सी movie है? अंधाधुन. My dad called. He's like, I said, I'm watching a movie, I'll talk later. They're like, at this time you're watching a movie in Delhi. I switched off the phone. बाद में बात. Swaraj. So, I'm not saying you should do it. So, now, 1907. On a lighter note, I was trying to point out that the Congress is trying to build a more, or is actually trying to show a certain degree of maturity and a certain degree of evolution in terms of broadening the scope of its demands. From the time where they're talking of Indianization of civil services and things like Indianization of civil services, etc., they are now giving a broader agenda for talk about Swaraj or self-governance on the lines of white British colonies. It's a certain amount of evolution in terms of the functioning of the Congress. In 1907, following another year of protests, 1907, following another year of protests, a dispute arose between the moderates and extremists, which eventually led to the split of what? Congress, due to A, the extremists wanted to extend the movement outside Bengal and under the presidency of Tilak. The moderates were hopeful of further constitutional what? Reforms. The moderates were hopeful of further constitutional reforms. As promised by British. And C, a deliberate denial of presidency to Tilak by extremists, a deliberate denial of presidency to Tilak by moderates. And the extremist view that moderates slowed the pace of freedom struggle. That moderates slowed the pace of freedom struggle. Okay. This is what led to the split of the Congress in 1907. Now, going beyond this, in 1908, देखिए अभी तो split हो गया, अभी तो action चालू होगा, right? Now, following the split of the Congress, moderates are on their own and extremists are on their own. The immediate impact in 1907 is that top extremist leaders are cracked down upon. The extremists now wanted to take the movement outside Bengal. In one go, the British government cracked down on the extremist leaders. How? Tilak was charged with raising disaffection against the British state, and was charged with raising disaffection against the British state, and was given a jail term of 6 years. 1908 to 1914, Tilak was in jail. Lajpat Rai got a concession and he was forced into exile, and he stayed in London over the next few years. Prominent extremist leader from Bengal, Aurobindo Ghosh, was forced to retire from from active politics, and he took more towards spirituality, etc. after 1908. So top extremist leadership was wiped out in one go by the British. Okay. So that is something which is happening. What is happening to the moderates, that we'll see in a while. But this is something that is happening in 1908. We say that from 1908 onwards, the top extremist leadership is nowhere to be seen. And the moderates are the ones who did not have any mass support anyways. Right? We said that the mass appeal of the Congress was built by whom? Extremists. The moderates did not have a mass base. And the moderates were hoping for a further constitutional reform. This further constitutional reform is what is introduced in 1909. That are the Molle-Minto reforms, or the Council Act of 1909. And we will see that the moderates were not very happy with the Council Act of 1909 when we will see the provisions of 1909 Act. The moderates are not very happy with the Council Act of 1909 because they felt that it is not transferring power to Indians in any substantive manner. So the moderates are left disappointed, we will see why, that we will see, by the Council Act of 1909. And the extremist leadership is gone. The Indian freedom struggle is looking at a the Indian freedom struggle, or one could say at least the Congress, is definitely staring at a bleak future. From 1908 to 1915, 14-15, the Congress was more or less a dormant institution. Extremist leaders with mass appeals were no longer there, and the moderates had been left dissatisfied with the proposed reforms. That is why we say that as a result of the Surat split of Congress, the Indian nationalism Indian nationalism and the growth of Indian nationalism, and primarily the Congress, received a major setback. That is something which is happening in 1907. Now, just a fun fact that Tilak's case in 1908, who represented Tilak in the 1908 case? Jinnah. Right? So Jinnah basically represented Tilak in the 1908 case, and Jinnah had joined the Congress. By this time, Jinnah had joined the Congress first, and later he is also joining the Muslim League. And after 1908, when he joins the Muslim League, he remains a member of Congress as well as the Muslim League till the 1920s. Okay, and what happens after that we'll discuss later. But that is the case, and that is there. And Jinnah had joined the Muslim League on the advice of the Congress and of leaders like Tilak. Jinnah himself, as I told you before also, was a prolific lawyer, and by 1920s, Jinnah was the highest paid lawyer in the country. Okay. So that is just as a briefer. Now, what about the Muslim League? Just briefly, Muslim League is formed by the landed elites from Eastern Bengal, and the landed elites of Eastern Bengal are what? Loyalists. They are professing loyalty to the British Crown, and the Shimla deputation had professed loyalty to the British Crown. The Shimla deputation had said another thing. That we forgot to write down there. You can write one line there in the Shimla deputation. That Shimla deputation basically offered support, right? Just एक चीज और जो आपको पता होना चाहिए, that the Shimla deputation expected, or it demanded, that the British would repay this loyalty. Don't worry, I'll just dictate that line. The British would repay this loyalty of whom? The Shimla deputation, with assured political representation for Muslims. You can write down that the Shimla deputation demanded that the British should repay this loyalty, with the grant of assured political representation. The British should repay this loyalty with the grant of assured political representation. The British should repay this loyalty with the grant of assured political representation. But 1907, when they are saying that we will bring about further devolution of power, and this is something that the moderates are hopeful of, this can also be termed as a cause for the Surat split, promoting the Surat split, you can say so. Okay. So that is that. Now, what you see is that why is the Muslim League loyalist to the British? Why are the Muslim League loyalists to the British? देखिए एक चीज समझ जाइए, अभी ना कांग्रेस का कोई बहुत बड़ा मास बेस है, मुस्लिम लीग का तो कुछ भी नहीं है ना. So it's not that Congress is like has too big of mass base in 1905-6. It's just starting out with a mass base. The Muslim League also does not have a mass base. But why is the Muslim League supportive of the British and the Congress is not? उनको एक अपना स्पेशल एरिया, अरे ये बड़ी बेसिक सी चीज़ है. Yes. See, what you're saying is that Sayyid Ahmad Khan argued that the whole loyalist outlook makes sense for Muslims because that would grant them access to education and jobs, which is true. But Sayyid Ahmad Khan is not the ideological founder of the Muslim League. Who are promoting loyalty to the British Muslim? Why is the Muslim League loyal to the British? Is because of the reason that I told you already, that they are landed elites. The class composition of who is forming the Muslim League, it really doesn't matter that whether it is Muslim League or any league, the landed elites dominating any league will support the British. The princely states also always supported the British, and the landed elites from Eastern Bengal who are Muslims also have a larger objective to be achieved by supporting the British. That is why they wanted assured political representation. Remember, Sayyid Ahmad Khan never talked about assured political representation. Sayyid Ahmad Khan now has become the ideological father of the Muslim League. Just because people want to trace a certain history. Abhi RSS will say that Vivekananda is our ideological founder, so aise thodi na ho jayega. So it's not that Sayyid Ahmad Khan has anything to do with the Muslim League in terms of direct propagation of the ideas of Muslim League. And the Muslim League here in 1906 is primarily representing the interests of not Muslims, but the landed elites from Eastern Bengal who are Muslims. Okay. The Muslim League is saying what? It is a representative of Muslim interest. But what Muslim interest? Who defines Muslim interest? What is Muslim interest? There is no deliberation in this. It is a small party composed of only the dominant elites from Eastern Bengal in 1906. Okay, that is why they are loyalists, not because they are Muslims. They are loyalists because they are the landed elites. Okay, so class and religion often overlap. This is a good example of this. Okay, so this is something that the Muslim League is saying, and we'll talk about Muslim League again and again later. Now, the Muslim League thus is supportive of the partition of Bengal. 1908. So basically, you can just write down one para. After 1907, the split of the Congress, we have written the causes, right? You can write down the next para. The Surat split of the Congress. The Surat split of the Congress considerably weakened. The Surat split of the Congress considerably weakened the Indian freedom struggle. Considerably weakened the Indian freedom struggle as the extremist leadership was suppressed, as the extremist leadership was suppressed. For example, as the extremist leadership was suppressed, for example, Tilak was jailed for 6 years. Tilak was jailed for 6 years from 1908 to 14. Aurobindo Ghosh was forced to retire from active politics. Aurobindo Ghosh was forced to retire from active politics and Lajpat Rai was forced into an exile. एग्जाइल, देश निकाला हो गया राजपद राजे का, लंदन चले गए वो। हमारे यहाँ से देश से जब लोगों को निकाला जाता है तो वो लंदन ही जाते हैं, तब भी आज भी, है ना। और भी ललित मोदी, नीरव मोदी, विजय माल्या, जो भी है, क्या सो ललित मोदी भी थे एक, अभी वो वही है, वो आए नहीं, लोग भूल गए उनको ऐसे अभी। लेकिन कलमाड़ी वलमाड़ी इनको लोग भूल जाते हैं, अभी माल्या को भूलना मुश्किल है। किंग ऑफ गुड टाइम्स, ब्रांडिंग ज्यादा कर दी अपनी, है ना, खाया पिया कम, शोर ज्यादा, बाकी बड़े बड़े लोग निकल गए। चलिए कोई बात। This weakened the Indian nationalism as the top extremist leadership was suppressed. Next, you can write, moreover, the moderate leadership lacked a mass base. Moreover, the moderate leadership lacked a mass base. And moderate leadership lacked the mass base and was left disappointed by the reforms of and was left disappointed by the reforms of 1900 and was left disappointed by the reforms of 1909. A revival of Congress activity and Indian nationalism was to be witnessed in a major way. A revival of Congress and nationalist activity was to be witnessed only after 1914. Following Tilak's release and attempts to reunify. Following Tilak's release and attempt to reunify what? Congress. ठीक है, अब ये हो गया। अभी हम दूसरी चीज की बात करेंगे, दैट इज मिलिटेंट नेशनलिज्म। देखिए, एक्सट्रीमिस्ट लीडरशिप हैड अ फॉलोइंग अमंग्स द यूथ। अब एक्सट्रीमिस्ट लीडर्स तो है नहीं, एंड मॉडरेट्स do not have any interest in involving the youth also, and the youth also do not have much interest in moderates. So the youth are left largely leaderless, and the British government is cracking down through lathi charges etc. on public protests. So now the youth take to what? अभी youth क्या करेगी? The youth will take to militant nationalism. देखिए, आर्म्स उठाने का काम youth ही का है। In the sense that militant activities are often something which involve the youth, and it is something which is visible here. From 1908 to 1911. Okay, 1908 to 1911, as the British government cracked down on open public protests, the youth now took to militant nationalism. The objective of militant nationalism was to assassinate unpopular British officials and to strike terror in the minds of British rulers and force them to withdraw from the region or to call off partition of Bengal. You know, all of these things were there. Prominent organizations of militant nationalists, and these factual things are important from your prelims point of view, were organizations like Yugantar. Yugantar was started by Barendra Kumar Ghosh. Barendra Kumar Ghosh is the younger brother of whom? Aurobindo Ghosh. Barendra Kumar Ghosh was the younger brother of Aurobindo Ghosh. And Yugantar was a relatively extremist organization and primarily centered in Bengal. Ghosh hai to Bengali. So primarily centered in Bengal. And Yugantar also took out a newspaper or a journal. The journal basically, what was the name of the journal? Abhinav Bharat alag hai. V.D. Savarkar, Abhinav Bharat is centered primarily in Pune and the Bombay region. So that is another thing. Okay, I'll just tell you the name in a while. मेरे को आ जाएगा दिमाग में थोड़ी देर में. Barendra Kumar Ghosh basically was associated with the Yugantar, and basically it was this organization which was held responsible for a major thing, that is the Alipur bombing case. 1907, there is a major case, that is the Alipur bombing case. And this Alipur bombing case, basically the attempt was to assassinate the district magistrate in Muzaffarpur, which was then a part of Bengal, and the attempt was to assassinate the district magistrate. Now, here, and following this Alipur bombing case, the British did a investigation to crack down on those who were held responsible, and basically where this conspiracy was hatched. And it was soon found that it was in the house of Barendra Kumar Ghosh, Aurobindo Ghosh's brother, that this whole conspiracy was hatched. Barendra Kumar Ghosh was imprisoned. Barendra Kumar Ghosh, Bhupendranath Datta, Barendra Kumar Ghosh, these all people were implicated. Okay, but Aurobindo Ghosh was left scot-free, was allowed to go free. Okay, for the absence of clear evidence, Aurobindo Ghosh was let off, but with the condition that he would stay away from all political activity. So Aurobindo Ghosh stays away from political activity. Barendra Kumar Ghosh is given a life imprisonment, and he stays in jail till 1920, only to be released after 1920. So he is in jail till 1920. And the Alipur bombing case was one of the major cases in which Aurobindo Ghosh was partly implicated, but for the absence of evidence was let to go free. Okay, so this is something which is happening. Okay, in 1904, and basically this is something which is happening in 1907. Then another individual in Bengal at this point of time, which is associated with militant activity, is Rash Behari Bose. What? Rash Behari Bose, another individual basically also associated with militant activities at this point of time in Bengal, is Rash Behari Bose. Now, Bose is also associated with a lot of these events, and ultimately Bose is also implicated in another event, and that is the Delhi conspiracy. And this conspiracy was to attack, your badi conspiracy thi. So this conspiracy was to attack Lord Hardinge at this point of time in Delhi. And to assassinate Lord Hardinge, the attempt was this, and you see that the Delhi conspiracy attempt was to assassinate Lord Hardinge, and this attempt partly succeeded. Lord Hardinge's driver and Mahout were killed, and he also suffered some injuries, but he managed to survive. And ultimately, Rash Bihari Bose was implicated, and this is happening in 1912. Okay, Rash Bihari Bose thus went into hiding after this. Okay, and by 1913, he is escaping from. After 1913, he is escaping from India. Okay, भाग गया, India छोड़ दिया उन्होंने. Then he went to London, and from there he is going to Paris, etc., and meeting another individual, and that is Madam Bikaji Kama. ये सारे नाम आपको पता होने चाहिए. I'm not going to dictate this or anything. I'm just telling you all these important names and individuals associated, because these facts you must know. Okay, who's associated with what conspiracy, what is happening in that broadly. Now he goes to Paris to meet Bikaji Kama, and Bikaji Kama was also a member of another organization that somebody is taking the name of, that is Abhinav Bharat was also an organization established by V.D. Savarkar, and this was primarily based in the Bombay province, and Bikaji Kama was also associated with the Abhinav Bharat as an organization. And you see that basically what did Bikaji Kama do? She is also very important. Wherever I've told you that women leaders are coming, they're pretty important from your examination point of view. Bikaji Kama was actually stationed and based in Paris, and she provided what? Training in bomb making to Indian revolutionaries. She provided training to bomb making in Indian revolutionaries then, including Rash Bihari Bose. Okay, and she was also associated with the Abhinav Bharat. She was one of the first ones who in the 1907 Stuttgart Conference on Socialism STUGGART, Stuttgart Conference, that was called in Germany on socialism. She attended the conference representing India, and also she met Lenin there, etc. And she unfurled the Indian flag, becoming one of the first individuals to unfurl an Indian flag at any major international gathering. Okay, so that is also something that you need to know about Bikaji Kama. She unfurled the Indian flag at the Stuttgart Conference on Socialism. अब ये स्टूगर्ट कॉन्फ्रेंस क्या है, आपको कोई मतलब नहीं है इस बात से, है ना, बस याद रख लीजिए. कोई कॉन्फ्रेंस ही सोशलिज्म पे. लेनिन मैंने आया इंडिया से. बिकाजी कामा इज देयर, and she is representing the viewpoint, unfurling an Indian flag for the very first time. And she is again one of those militant nationalists, and also important by because she is a woman, relatively lesser number of which were there. So you see that is something. Now Rash Bihari Bose basically received training from Bikaji Kama also, and after that Rash Bihari Bose is going from Paris to where? Bose then went from Paris to Japan. Bose went from Paris to Japan and stayed in Japan till the 1940s. Up till his eventual death, he stayed in Japan. And in the 1940s, when Subhash Chandra Bose is going there, and the INA was conceived even before Bose, he is providing support to the formation of INA by acting as a link with the Japanese government there. So he also supported the formation of INA. He supported the formation of INA. Bose Rash Behari Bose, basically, Rash Behari Bose supported the formation of INA in Japan during the 1940s. Okay. And this is something that you should know. One more thing about Rash Behari Bose that you should know is that he was in 1913 also helping the Ghadar party organize its activity in India. Okay. So that is also there. After this, when the Ghadar party idea doesn't work out, he escapes. Like every time is up. Now either you will go for life in prison or you will go upar. Time is to leave, right? So he is also associated with the Ghadar party in India. Okay, so खूब dynamic life. सब देख लिया, right? So that is there. Now this is something that you should know, basic facts about these individuals. Now okay, so this is happening from 1908 to 1911. A number of these militant activities are happening in Bengal and beyond Bengal also. Now I'll tell you about the 1909 Act in a bit, but what I'm more interested in firstly telling you is that in 1911, what is happening? In 1911, the partition of Bengal is called off. Okay? But why was the partition of Bengal called off, etc., that we will write and discuss in a minute. But firstly you write down just a brief on all this militant activity. 1908 to 1911. 1908 to 1911. The growth of militant nationalism. The growth of militant nationalism primarily involving the youth of Bengal. The growth of militant nationalism primarily involving the youth of Bengal was witnessed in the region as they aim to assassinate unpopular British officials. This led to attempted assassinations. Like the Alipore bombing, ALIPORE, like the Alipore bombing incident and case. Like the Alipore bombing incident and case of 1907. And the Delhi conspiracy. Case of 1912. Organizations like the Anushulan Samiti. Organizations like ANU SHILAN Samiti, formed by Barindra Kumar Ghosh, formed by Barindra Kumar Ghosh, formed by Barindra Kumar Ghosh and Bhupendranath Datta, and newspapers like Yugantar. Yugantar is actually the newspaper. I was confused. So and newspapers like Yugantar spread revolutionary ideas amongst. And newspapers like Yugantar spread revolutionary ideas amongst whom? The youth. अलीपुर बॉम्बिंग केस में दो नाम और थे, प्रफुल्ल चाकी एंड खुदीराम बोस. ओके, these two were also associated with the Alipur bombing case. Okay. Now, देखिए, next thing is, I'll talk about Molly Minto reforms in a minute, but 1911, the partition of Bengal was called off by the British. What can be the reasons why you think that the partition of Bengal was called off? Militant nationalism, अंग्रेज डर गए. ये अलीपुर बॉम्बिंग केस में कोई मरा वरा नहीं था, ये प्रफुल्ल चाकी, खुदीराम बोस, these people only died. अभी the British feel that they have already achieved their objective to split the Congress and weaken Indian nationalism. So अभी we can undo the partition of Bengal. कुछ और? Any other reason that you can think of? See, nexus between Muslim League and British. So, the Muslim League wants partition of Bengal, but in 1911, the partition of Bengal is being called off. The Muslim League is actually unhappy with the calling of the partition of Bengal. World War 1914. भी समय है World War. समय है. They are scared of the militant nationalism. अरे देखिए, एक चीज समझिए. Is the Indian state scared today of a few militant activities in Kashmir? That is the British Empire. ठीक है. अभी कॉन्फिडेंस की एक सीमा होती है. British Empire is not going to be scared of one or two incidents here and there. घुस के मारेंगे वो. Okay. To call the British to call off such a major policy decision by the use of force in a few isolated incidents, unlikely. I'll explain you the reason. There are two or three reasons. Okay. One, in 1911, the British government called off the partition of Bengal and shifted the capital of India from Calcutta to Delhi. Okay. Now, the reasons for this are two or three. Unlikely that they will ask you reasons in the exam. Okay. One reason is that if the objective was to weaken Indian nationalism, that had been achieved with the split of the Congress. The other reason why they're looking to call off the partition of Bengal is actually a bit more complex, in the sense that again, this is partly explained in the Thik Bipin Chandra, India's Struggle Till Independence, where to explain the nature of British rule, Bipin Chandra is making the use of a prominent neo-Marxist thinker Gramsci, right? That आपको, I'm not going to dictate this, but I'm just broadly explaining you the idea of what is Gramsci trying to say. देखिए, there is something which is important because this is something which helps you understand what is happening at this time. Gramsci says that any ruler, चाहे वो डेमोक्रेट हो, चाहे वो डिक्टेटर हो, चाहे वो डेमोक्रेट हो, डिक्टेटर हो, मिलिट्री रूलर हो, किंग हो, monarch, whoever it is, whether it's a monarchy or a dictatorship or a democracy, Gramsci is saying that any ruler and every ruler rules primarily through two mechanisms, and both the mechanisms, not through one but through both. One is the use of force, and the other is through the rules by, through the use of force, and the other it rules by consent. ये consent आजकल important term है, but primarily through the use of force as well as through the use of consent of whom? The subject class. He says every ruler makes use of both. What may differ is that some rulers may rule more by consent and less by force, but there is no ruler who does not use force, and there is no ruler who does not use consent. Both are used. Okay. And where is this need of a consent? Gramsci is of the opinion that a ruling class, Gramsci says that a ruling class can never rule merely with the use of force. He is saying however strong a ruler may be, however authoritarian or dictatorial a ruler may be, he cannot rule merely with the use of force. Why? देखिए, बड़ी सिंपल सी बात है. The armed forces can be out on the streets to tackle a crowd of 5,000, 10,000, or maybe 20,000, or maybe 50,000. But if 2 lakh people are out on the street, then no armed force in the world can. अभी फिर आपको न्यूक्लियर बम ही फेंकना पड़ेगा, okay? या टैंक वैंक चलाना पड़ेगा, and then also it will be difficult. If you have 2 lakh people out on the streets, there's something that has happened in India before. The JP movement, Jayaprakash movement saw lakhs of individuals, primarily the youth, out on the streets. And in that context, you are left with what? A situation that when either you will have to use heavy force or you will have to give in the demands. Okay? If you make use of heavy force, there is always a danger. The more force you use, the more counter response may also be increasingly violent. More importantly, even using the army in such a situation is a very tricky affair, because the army may also refuse to obey the orders of whom? Their rulers, and may actually say that we refuse to obey the order and may bring about a coup, etc. So these are risky affairs, and that is why strong rulers often try to avoid a situation where they have to face a mass protest, irrespective of whoever they are, whether they are elected or unelected rulers. They often, to avoid the use of force very frequently and to prevent a large scale uprising, they do what? They try to rule by consent. They try to rule by consent because rulers want to avoid the use of force. They only want to avoid it. They are not something that हम नहीं करेंगे. Okay? They try to avoid. Why? And because of this reason. And to avoid the rule of use of force, every ruler wants to give the impression that it is ruling by the consent of the masses. Explicit हो चाहे implicit हो, consent है. And masses need to imbibe the idea that the ruler is there for what? For the welfare of the masses. How do the masses imbibe the idea that the rulers are for their welfare? For example, the government reaches out to the people how? Through the press. For example, Gramsci argues that the government reaches out to the people through institutions like the press, informing the people that we have introduced farmers bhaiyon, ruk jao. We have Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. We have MSP. आप रुक जाइए, वी हैव हाउसिंग फॉर ऑल, आप रुक जाइए, वी हैव हेल्थ केयर फॉर ऑल, आयुष्मान भारत, आप रुक जाइए, वी हैव स्वच्छ भारत, आप भी रुक जाइए, वी हैव टोटल सैनिटेशन, सब कुछ है हमारे पास, आप भी रुक जाइए, वी हैव क्लीन गंगा, सब सरकार सब कोशिश कर रही है, क्यों? वॉन्ट्स योर वेलफेयर, एंड द गवर्नमेंट ट्राइज टू उज्ज्वला, सब है, सरकार इज ट्राइंग टू इंश्योर योर वेलफेयर एकदम फुल ऑन, ओके, फ्रॉम द टाइम्स ऑफ जो जो नहीं किया नेहरू वेहरू ने, वो सब सरकार अभी कर रही है फुल ऑन, welfare of the masses. That is what the ruling class wants to ensure, that people believe this idea, because if people do not believe these ideas, then they will be out on the streets. So in that, and that is a dangerous proposition for any ruler. And if suppose they still come out on the streets, you have to rely on the use of force. Then the ruler of the state will not shy away from the use of force, and a good ruler will try to use both of them in a manner that he will prevent people from coming out on the streets, will continue with the impression that the rule of the ruler is benign and is necessary for what? Welfare of the masses. And how does the ruler ensure that his rule is considered benign and is considered good by the masses for their welfare? When rulers respond to what? Demand of the masses. When rulers respond to demand of the masses, आपने बोला कि MSP चाहिए, मैंने बढ़ा दिया MSP. आपने बोला कि बीमा चाहिए for crop insurance for farmers, so I have given you crop insurance for farmers. आपने बोला कि हेल्थ केयर का खर्चा बढ़ रहा है, डरो मत, जो आपने बोला हम कर रहे हैं. Rulers are responsive to the demands of the masses. That is what the masses want, and that is why the ruler is here. That is what rulers want to give the impression, and that is why they respond to the demands of the masses. But while responding to the demands of masses, the aim of the ruler is primarily to prolong his own rule, and it does not change the nature of the rule or his objective. He is merely making concessions. He is not solving the real issue. Rulers are willing to make concessions to acquire or to give an impression to the masses that their rule is benign. The British government at this time is saying कि अरे, we are doing the vikas. We are establishing medical hospitals, we are establishing schools, we are establishing universities, we are establishing railways, we are giving government jobs. Arey, everything we are doing. How can you say that the British rule is what? Is alien? Is something which is looking to exploit Indians? Nahi, we are doing vikas. Or boliye, you want that the partition of Bengal must be called off, so we are willing to call off the partition of Bengal. Do not think that the British rule is one which is not responsive to the demands of people. Now you would want to assume today that Indians in 1911 carried a unanimous view that the British rule was detrimental to them. Not everybody bought this idea. Not everybody in India bought the idea that the British rule was disastrous or was negative to them. Why? Because the British rule carried two uses. Firstly, the British rule had managed to convince the masses about two things in many ways. That firstly, the British rule is not all evil, and it does think about the welfare of the people. And secondly, it is impossible to overthrow the British rule. The British had maintained a hegemony, or had maintained a hegemony. This is what Mark Gramsci says, that rulers rule by hegemony. Okay? And the hegemonic ideas that Gramsci is saying are being put to use are that the British rule is indefeatable, is undefeatable. It cannot be defeated. This is something that Indians must imbibe, because nowhere in the world have the British ever been overthrown, except for say the American Revolution. Okay, and the British rule is something that cannot be defeated, and also the British rule is something that will ensure the welfare of Indians. As long as Indians imbibe these two ideas, There will never be a mass revolution, and the hegemonic rule of the British will continue. And that is what they say. Today, it is very difficult to conceive of an overthrow of the state. Why? Because a section of Indians, no, I'm not saying illusion, no, फालतू की बात नहीं कर रहे, हमें नहीं जाना है जेल. A section of Indians may believe, or a large section of Indians may believe, that the rule of Indian political parties is something which is going to bring about their welfare. And another section understands and believes that the Indian state is powerful, it cannot be easily overthrown, and it will not shy away from the use of force when required. So to that extent, it is impossible to overthrow the existing state, and if it is impossible, you have already lost the battle. If you feel that the objective is impossible to achieve, the battle has already been lost in the realm of ideas itself. So if the Congress was to strengthen Indian nationalism, it had to counter this hegemony of the British rule, that it is undefeatable and that it cannot, and that it is a relatively benign rule. And for this, the Congress had to do two things. To convince the masses, first, that what? The British rule is not benign rule. And secondly, it had to involve the masses. Masses will be involved only when they are convinced that the British rule is not benign. And secondly, when they believe that it is possible to overthrow the British. Both the things. So that is what is required. The hegemony of the British has to be first countered in the battle of ideas. When this hegemony is countered with a counter hegemony by the British, by the Congress, only then, once Congress wins the battle of ideas, only then it can translate it into an eventual overthrow of the British. So that is what Gramsci is saying, that to overthrow any established ruler, you need a counter hegemony to be built by those who want to overthrow the existing ruler. ये overthrow की बात करते हैं वो लोग कहाँ होते हैं? जेल में. हमें नहीं जाना है जेल, है ना? Gramsci also was in jail. He wrote all of this in jail in his prison notebooks, which was published as Gramsci's prison diaries and later as a book, है ना? ऐसा एक ज़्यादा क्रांति जो करते हैं जेल में ही, हमें नहीं. तो that is something that Gramsci is arguing. And this is something why, if British are now calling off the partition of Bengal, on the one side their objective has been achieved, on the other side what has happened? If they are now calling off the partition of Bengal, they can tell the masses, आपने बोला तो हमने कर दिया. You wanted to call a partition of Bengal, सरकार ने आपकी सुन ली. Sarkar is there for your welfare. The British are here for your welfare. First petrol prices increased by 30 rupees, then they dropped by 5 rupees. Sarkar ne aapki sun li. You take 4 steps forward, 1 step backwards. The government has responded to your demands. You are happy. That is all the government wants. It wants you to be happy. Chale likh liye. So in just mention one line, in 1909, the Morley-Minto reforms, Morley-Minto reforms that led to what? The Council Acts, that led to the Council Act of 1909. That led to the Council Act of 1909 was introduced. Then next you give 1911. The British decided to call off the partition of, the British decided to call off the partition of Bengal and the British decided to call off the partition of Bengal and shift the capital from where to where? From Calcutta to Delhi. From Calcutta to Delhi. And agreed to shift the capital from Calcutta to Delhi. Next paragraph you write. The British decision to call off the partition, could be seen as an attempt to establish their hegemony over the masses during this period. Now, let's talk about 1900. Any doubts still here? Anything you want to ask first?
So what was the need for transferring
What was the need for shifting the capital from Calcutta to Delhi is essentially because that this was a long-standing demand actually. There were two broad reasons for this. The long-standing demand was that now when the British had started from Bengal and Calcutta, they had predominantly established their hold first there. So that is why Calcutta became the capital of British in India. But now that they were controlling the whole country, it was better to have a capital situated somewhere center. And Delhi had always been the capital. And the second reason was that the Muslim League was opposed to the calling off of the partition of Bengal. However, the British also argued that we are shifting the capital to Delhi, which has always been the center of Mughal power or Muslim power. So this is also something that should make you happy, which was mainly a symbolic gesture. But that is something that does not make the Muslim League really happy. It's not enough for them. So it was primarily administrative considerations and partly saying that to placate the Muslim League. That is why they shifted the capital to Delhi. Anything else? Okay. So the last thing for today, and that is the provisions of the Morley Minto reform. The provisions of the Morley Minto reforms, ये सीधा prelims में पूछा जा सकता है. Okay. Now, the Morley Minto reforms or the Council Act of 1909. देखिए, यहाँ पे आपको पहली चीज ये पता होना चाहिए that what they are going to propose is going to be more devolution than 1892. उससे कम नहीं हो सकता. It has to be more than that, right? So देखिए ऐसा थोड़ी ना, ब्रिटिश आर नॉट रिस्पॉन्डिंग. ब्रिटिश ने बोला तुमको चाहिए और डेवोल्यूशन, वी आर गिविंग और डेवोल्यूशन. जो मांग रहे हो सब दे रहे हैं. आपने बोला यू नीड मोर डेवोल्यूशन, लीजिए मोर डेवोल्यूशन. यू वांट पार्टीशन ऑफ बंगाल टू बी कॉल्ड ऑफ द पार्टीशन. आपको बस बोलने की जरूरत है, राइट? सो दैट इज द Actually, the Morley-Minto reforms, firstly, the first line the British stated in the Morley-Minto reforms, that the objective of the Morley-Minto reform was not, you can write with me, the objective of Morley-Minto reform was not to establish so the objective was not to establish not to establish self-governing institutions. अरे देखिए बहुत प्रोटेस्ट किया अन्ना हजारे ने एंड अदर्स, सो वी हैड लोकपाल बिल पास, बहुत लड़ झगड़ के हो गया पास तो हो गया पास. लोकपाल इज नॉट देयर, bill has been passed. 2 years of UPA government and 4 years of BJP government have passed, but Lokpal is nowhere to be seen. If only you had a strong Lokpal mechanism right now, people would not have had to go to the court for the Rafale issue. It would have gone to the Lokpal. But hey, so was not to establish self-governing institutions in India. Why are they saying this? They are saying this so that they are actually telling the moderates and the Congress कि you want some Swaraj etc., self-governance on the lines of white British colonies. ये objective ही नहीं है 1909 का. They are saying that we are not going to establish any self-governing institutions in India. We will give more power, but that does not mean that we will give self-governance to you on the lines of white British colonies. They are making that clear in 1909. Why is this point important? ऐसा statement आ जाएगा. Okay, and they will say which of the following statements is true. This statement is true with respect to 1909. In 1919, we will see later that they say that the objective is to establish self-governing institutions in India. Second thing they said कि भाई, what is the next thing? They said that the next thing is that, okay, you want more representation. If you remember, I told you elected Indians were introduced for the first time in 1892, right? Now they are saying that elected Indians were to be introduced for the first time in 1892. They are now saying that Indians, the representation of Indians in legislative councils would be increased, and so that Indians would be in a majority. Indians would be in a majority in legislative councils. Now, Indians would be in a majority in the legislative councils. However, this still meant, the official, the non-elected majority remained. The non-elected majority remained. What do you mean by this? That suppose there were 100 individuals, then there would be 30 elected Indians, 30 Indians appointed by the British, and there would be 40 British officials. If you have 30 Indians appointed by British and 40 British officials, then out of 100, 70 are what? Non-elected. But at the same point of time, there are 30 elected Indians and there are 30 Indians appointed by the British. 60 are what? Indians. So then उन्होंने बोला आपको क्या चाहिए? More Indian representation. We are giving more Indian representation. For the first time they said 50%, more than 50% of the member Indians है. और बताओ, यही तो मांगा था आपने, more Indian representation. We are giving you more Indian representation. Okay, so that is what they are saying. Indians are to be a majority in the legislative council for the first time. Then they said, but no voting powers over the budget was not granted. Voting powers over the budget were not granted to the legislative councils. Muslim League said, we want assured political representation. So they said that we are introducing separate electorate for Muslims. They said that we are introducing separate electorate for Muslims. What do you mean by separate electorates? ये भी पूछ सकते हैं वो prelims में. What do you mean by separate electorates? ये तो सबने रटा हुआ है. Council Act of 1999, separate electorates were introduced for Muslims. What do you mean by separate electorates? Muslims will contest and Muslims will vote for Muslims. Because the other idea was joint electorate with reservation. See, we say that separate electorate is or Congress argued that separate electorate was a divisive idea, something that they were opposed to. Why? Because in separate electorate, you are saying what? Indirectly, when you say that we support the idea of separate electorates, you are saying that certain constituencies will be reserved for Muslims who will contest from these, only Muslims will contest from these constituencies and only Muslims will vote. Meaning that there cannot be one Muslim individual for whom both Hindus and Muslims both can vote. Suppose you reserve a constituency for Muslims, for a Muslim candidate, but in which both Muslims, Hindus, all other communities all vote, then such a candidate will be a representative of whom? All communities. Why? Because he will have to appeal for votes to all communities. Right. So there is a better chance that such an individual will represent the interest of all communities, even though if he is coming from one particular religion. So this is a less, or one could say this is not a divisive idea. If you give them reservation, but everybody votes for them. But the British said no. Separate electorates, the idea of separate electorates would mean what? That individual from one religious community can only represent the interests of that community. That is why on seats reserved for Muslims, only Muslims will be allowed to vote. That is the idea of separate electorate. If both Muslims and Hindus were to vote, that would be the idea of joint electorates. Electorate is what? The one who vote. Electorate is one who elects or one who votes. So joint electorates means all communities will vote. Joint electorates with reservation for Muslims was another way through which you could give them assured political representation. There could be two ways for giving representation to Muslims. One was joint electorate and the other was separate electorate. So the Congress said that they are opposed to the idea of separate electorates. They did not say that they are opposed to the idea of assured political representation for Muslims. Do you get this point? Everybody? That उनको प्रॉब्लम नहीं है कि मुस्लिम्स के लिए रिजर्वेशन दिया जा रहा है. The problem is separate electorates. They said give them joint electorates. Do not give them separate electorates. This was seen as the element of divide and rule policy of the British. So separate electorates, but the Maulay Minto reforms did not grant joint electorates with reservation for Muslims. Rather, it granted separate electorates for Muslims. And the Congress rejected, but the Muslim League welcomed. Again, women are not getting the right to vote. Women are still not being granted any right to vote. Okay, that is what is there. So, abhi aap dekhiye that though this reform has been introduced, what has actually changed? Practically very little. Very little has actually changed in practice. Why? Because though Indian representation has been increased, the Legislative Council has limited powers. Elected Indians are still in a minority. Elected Indians are still in a minority, yes or no? Right? Elected Indians are still in a minority. Legislative councils still do not have voting powers over the budget. And you're also introducing the idea of separate electorate. The moderate leadership of the Congress was dissatisfied with the devolution of power proposed in 1909. And anyways, they are saying, वैसे भी हमारा objective है ही नहीं self rule लाने का. But still we are bringing in changes. Now do you understand Gramsci? अगर लाना ही नहीं था तो ये क्यों लाए? इसीलिए लाए कि 4 कदम आगे 1 कदम पीछे. That is why this is a concession. This is not really meeting the demand. It is merely a concession. Okay. So that is which does not address the real demand. Any questions? We will see that the idea of separate electorate gets extended to other communities by 1919. No. Other religious communities are extended the idea, and linguistic communities are extended separate electorates. Anyways, this separate electorates for Muslim is actually going to be dominated by whom? The Muslim landed elites. That is there. It's not that on the basis of economic class they were giving separate electorates. That is not there. Anything else? Okay, one more thing before you leave. There's an announcement by ma'am. Ma'am has asked, have you people been doing the assignments? Which assignment? That's a good question. I don't know. हाँ, एक सेकंड, अच्छा सवाल है, मुझे नहीं पता कौन सा बच्चे पूछ रहे हैं. Okay, have you been, I mean, do you have some assignments, right? Do you have assignments? देखिए किसी ने एक देखिए चलिए ठीक है. मैम विल कम एंड मैम देखिए मैं आपको कम्युनिकेट कर दे रहा हूँ जो मुझे कम्युनिकेट किया गया. सो मैम हैज बीन सेइंग दैट व्हाटएवर असाइनमेंट्स और क्वेश्चंस व्हाटएवर यू हैव क्वेश्चंस राइटिंग वाले कुछ मिले आपको कहीं? हाँ, we have been writing the weekly test. देखिए जो लोग नहीं लिख रहे उनको लिखना चाहिए, जो लिख रहे हैं continue the good work. Ma'am is of the opinion that she'll come and probably talk to you about all these tests etc. and probably take a better view of whether you are writing or not also. Okay, तो हाँ जी, wow. So जनता की बात सुनी जानी चाहिए. हाँ, क्या बताइए. Okay.
We have been given the free access to this all India test, and now we are listening to some kind of assignment and all. You don't have any idea.
Okay.
Assignment from the test.
आपकी बात.
Even in the mails, like the subjective test, we can't give the copy evaluated answer being on the timely basis. We have to wait for the longer period of time, 15 days, 20 days and all.
ओके और बोलिए एक. हाँ, सो ठीक है, आई विल टॉक टू मैम. वी हैव अ क्लास टुमारो आल्सो and next Monday Tuesday also. Okay, so tomorrow we'll have a class, then next Monday Tuesday also we'll have a class. Okay, and हाँ बोलिए कोई दिक्कत नहीं है. क्या जब तक no, We'll have a class. Thank you. And I'll communicate.